This is VikesNow, Dustin Baker, the Tuesday, May 17th edition. And we're going to spend 15 minutes talking about the ESPN Football Power Index that was released last night or this morning. Not sure what the publication date was. This is the predictive index, where they use numbers to take the temperature on all 32 teams. And these aren't power rankings from a dude like me or somebody else that looks at the roster and eye test coach off season and says, yeah, 16th. No, this is by the numbers, the ESPN one. They release annually and then update daily as the summer goes on in this case, and then regular season. So last year, the Vikings finished at 16th, unsurprisingly, right in the middle of the whole damn thing. And this year, and I guess what you'd call the preseason or pre-summer rankings, they're 13th. So they've climbed 3 spots. And, that's not something that we hang the banner for. But what it does do is it gives a current perception of the court of public opinion where the Vikings are the 13th best team in the world. So I want to go through all of these numbers. You might get bored with the numbers. I apologize in advance, but I have to set the table for all of their forecasts. They do this based on 10,000 simulations with strengths of schedule, the current roster, all of the numbers, so to speak. And that's why it's different than, just John Doe writing power rankings. So they're considered the 13th best team, with the 9th best offense, a top 10 offense, and the 19th best defense. And this is about what you would expect from a coach, first-time coach with an offense brain taking over a previously defensively geared organization. 9th best offense, 19th defense. And you shudder to think what the 19th best defense would be without Patrick Peterson coming back or without Lewis Cine being drafted. So thankfully, Kwesi Adofo-Mensah has recognized the need for youth on defense and speed. If you look at Lewis Cine or Brian Asamoah, who are speed demons for their position, freaks, so to speak, as some pundits call them. Minnesota has a 54.4% chance to reach the playoffs per these ESPN power rankings, which is a fair and surprisingly optimistic when you consider what some of the other power rankings that are not based on numbers have indicated. And one thing that stood out to me on this playoff prediction, 54.4%, is that the Chiefs are only at 54.6%. And it's a very small variation and strange because you would consider the Chiefs are an absolute shoo-in for the postseason. But if you talk to your pals out in Utah or something, they would think the Vikings are, middle of the pack, might be 9-8 and sneak into the postseason. But not according to the Football Power Index before you. Vikings have a 30% chance to win the division. I think we're still operating under the concept that the Packers are the cream of the crop, even though they've had a lot of departures with Devontae Adams, Adarius Smith. Until Rodgers shows evidence of seeing the cliff, looking down, and taking a Peyton Manning-like, Ben Roethlisberger-like jump off of it, I think they're always going to be forecast as the top team in the NFC North, which is fair because the guys won 2 MVP awards, and they keep winning the division every time since 2017. And then bada bing, he has 2 MVP awards consecutively. So the 30% estimation, I understand it. I think the world's a little bit too high on Green Bay. It's not surprisingly coming from a Viking show, a quip coming from a Viking show, I should say. But 30% odds to win the division is what the power index says. And then interestingly, 30.6 to reach the divisional round of the playoffs, which means they would have a bye, first seed. Probably not going to happen unless something really cool happens, or they actually win a wild card game, which would be welcomed for a first-year coach and Kevin O'Connell to get past round 1 of the playoffs, which Minnesota hasn't done since they shocked the Saints with the Kyle Rudolph walk-off almost 3 years ago now. 2 years ago on a calendar, it'll be 3 by the time that they get there to try to do it again. They have 15% chance to reach the NFC Championship, so these odds just kind of dwindle, and that totally understandable because there's 32 teams. And then a 7.7% chance to reach the Super Bowl. So take that as you may. There's not too much. And it's interesting because this based on what you hear in the community, in the national community, 7.7 is actually pretty generous, and then 3.5% to win the whole thing. So that's where we stand. In mid-May, the Vikings have a 3.5% chance to win the Super Bowl, which I think there's only a handful of coaches that have won the Super Bowl in their first year, and they're usually taking over superstar teams like, I think, George Seifert, the 49ers did it. And, I looked this up a couple weeks ago. Can't remember who the other dude was. But some notes that are not numbers being thrown at you, that the divide here, if you go look at post-draft power rankings from Bleacher Report, CBS Sports, I think Florio's, NBC, Sporting News, they all have Minnesota living at 20, 21, 22, or 23, indicating they're about the 11th worst team in football. But when ESPN publishes this, the numbers-based edition, there's a divide. There's a big divide, and I find it so fascinating because the 13th best is more in line with what you think based on your optimism and the promise of youth and newness from O'Connell and Adolfo-Mensah. So the old way, or the power rankings way, or the guy who writes for a living way, they look at the roster and they see that Cousins is leading the enterprise, and they think, oh yeah, not going to do much, so let's toss him in there at 21. And that's happening all over the place if you follow these narratives or rankings league-wide, that the Vikings aren't forecasted to make too much noise. But when you get something like this, it renews the enthusiasm, because it's like, oh, somebody gets it. Somebody thinks like I do. So keep an eye on the national discourse, the body politic opinion of average Joe's power rankings versus what the numbers suggest based on strength of schedule, the condition of the roster, and then of course your hope in something that's new and not related to Mike Zimmer. Other thing to call out is that overall, in all of those things that I read off, 9th best offense, 19th best defense, 13th best overall, blah 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 percentage to reach the Super Bowl. The Vikings are usually bedfellows with the Colts, Browns, and Raiders. That's kind of the scale when you go through it. The one I mentioned about the Chiefs, that one was weird because that was the only one where the Chiefs and the Vikings were bunched up against each other. So overall, or generally speaking, Indianapolis, Cleveland, and Las Vegas are the franchises that are most commonly adjacent to the Vikings in these ESPN football predictive rankings. Let's see. What was the other? Oh, and then on the overall FPI, the first one, the one that brought you to the article or to the tweet from Seth Walder, is that Minnesota's 13th best. Well, the Broncos, who just had a marvelous offseason, are the 12th best. So that's more perspective as to how these can vary, that the offseason moves generate pizzazz, because otherwise, without Russell Wilson, Broncos would have been stuck down there in that 24-25 purgatory, and without the Vikings hiring O'Connell or making the moves that I talked about with Lewis Cine and Patrick Peterson, they probably would be closer to what the power rankings suggest from the literary pundits. And the final two things, I've said this before, and I'll probably say it throughout the summer. I want to reiterate this because this is vital, that with every move the Vikings didn't make or they did make, with Kwesi Adolfo-Mensah at the helm, they're banking on the fact that the primary problem from last year and even back to 2020 was the head coach, the former one, Mike Zimmer. Because otherwise there was a perfect opportunity, a green light to singe the depth chart and start anew. You had Cousins who didn't have a no-trade clause, so he could have been sent to Siberia. He could have been sent to anywhere. He was not. He was re-upped for an extra season on top of it all. So no matter how you examine it, it's as if the new leadership and Adolfo-Mensah and O'Connell came in. They looked at the depth chart and said, let's see here. And then they looked at the salary cap and said, let's see here. And at the end of it, the consensus was to continue building upon what was already there. They did not have to do that. That didn't have to be that way. even retaining some of the veterans like Harrison Smith, Eric Kendricks, Dalvin Tomlinson, Dalvin Cook, Adam Thielen. It didn't have to be that way, but they opted to because they see the capability, the potential, the talent that is there. And again, going back to the idea that the only thing that was causing doldrums was the coaching staff. And I can't pound that home enough because although the vibe, the energy, everything about the week one and first month of the season are going to feel different because it's brand new play calling and different clock management, it's really the same players with Zadarius Smith, Jordan Hicks replacing Anthony Barr, and then the young guys from the draft class that Adolfo Mensa handpicked. And those young guys conceivably could have been a Spielman draft class. So it's really not that much different from a roster perspective, even though Michael Pierce is gone and, like I said, Barr isn't here anymore. But on the whole, it's the same team with different leadership. And I think that's what I have for breaking down the power ranking index. Go pull up some ordinary power rankings that don't involve simulations. They just involve a person sitting at their computer, and read the temperature. You're going to see the same thing. Can't believe this team re-upped with Cousins. Boom, they're 21st best in the league. But when you put it through a calculator, like ESPN did in these predictive power rankings, it's a little bit of a different story. It's not quite top 10 stuff, but it's an interesting divide because the 13th best from the power ranking in ESPN is more in line with what you probably think rather than, Florio at NBC Sports. That's all I got for Tuesday. I will be back Wednesday, and Skol, baby.